Welcome everybody to Business Monday, the 4 o'clock hour. I'm Josh Fenton here at GoLocal Live. This man is Cha-ching, the money man, Gary Sasse, head of the Hassenfeld Institute at Bryant University. Ernie Almonte was on a little earlier talking about World Trade Day. This is an all Bryant day here on GoLocal Live. We are looking out the windows, pouring rain, and a Cisco truck has blocked traffic in all directions, including backing up RIPTA trucks, RIPTA buses for blocks to come. Busy couple of weeks here. You were on vacation last week, lounging in a pool somewhere exotic where you wealthy industrialists hang out, probably tied to your Russian friends at the Black Sea or something like that.
It wasn't a vacation.
Let's start over in the State House. We had a couple stories over the past 10 days about these numbers that got built into the budget, $23.5 million counted on for this year's budget, an estimation of more for next year's budget, tied to sports betting. To date, after 7/12 of the fiscal year, we're netting out $150,000 rather than the $13.1 or $2 million that should have been in the state coffers to date. The American Gaming Association called up GoLocal and said, not our fault. The numbers, state of Rhode Island didn't look at the right column in the studies we did and didn't read the footnotes, made assumptions based on a mature gambling market 3 to 5 years in, and blew the estimations. Your thoughts on incorrect budget information and what the implications are for the state?
Well, clearly there was incorrect budget information, incorrect analysis. Normally something where you project you're going to get 23 million and you get much less in a $4 billion budget is a very small percentage. And so it's a problem that you don't want to have, but it's a problem that you can manage. But it becomes serious or more serious when other revenues are not meeting expectations. It becomes more serious when the economy is slowing down, and based on the jobs numbers, that appears to be the case. So the problem becomes magnified given the kind of environment that we find ourselves in today. Mistakes are made all the time. I don't think there's been any administration that's put a budget together and a few weeks later, after it's been presented, or a few months later, boy, I wish we had done this differently. So that's part of the problem. But to put it in broader perspective and not to try to see the forest, not the trees, the state came out, I think, last week with their March revenue projection. And what that projection shows is that revenues, all general revenues, are running about $27-28 million behind estimates. So that's about 1%. Given the tightness, given the governor's...
There's just no discretionary maneuverability,
is
there?
No flexibility. And given in the other, problem, there's a semi-political problem, fiscal problem. The governor has a kind of tax and spend mentality in this budget. So during a period when the economy is slowing down, when there's some uncertainty about revenues, when new revenue sources are being put on the table, and you don't have experience, it didn't slow anybody down, didn't slow the governor down in requesting new programs and more money. So we have expansion of the Higher Education Promise Program. We have the pre-K kindergarten, universal pre-K kindergarten, program. If you look through the budget grows by twice the rate of inflation. It grows by over 4%. Inflation is under 2% right now. There are 200 more people, full-time equivalent positions in the budget. So we have a very tight economic situation. We have, revenue estimates that are unsure, and so any little tweak creates a bigger problem than it has to be. But when you net everything out, you look at the total forest. The last state projection; these are pretty good projections.
Yeah.
Is that revenue is running 1% behind what was projected, and most of the problem is not coming from the gambling revenues not meeting expectations. It's coming from both business and income taxes being behind. And quite frankly, I'd be more concerned about that. I know why the gambling revenue is falling behind. That's pretty easy to document. We have had no experience with it. We were too aggressive in making the estimate. We know that. That mistake was made. We correct it. But I have to look at why our personal income tax is falling behind, why our business corporation tax is falling behind, why other business taxes are falling behind estimate, and that is of greater concern. Now, having said that, the big month is April. All these problems can wash away like this rain out there
Yeah.
today if we have a good year, a good April, good month collections with the personal income tax. But as of right now, we're in a situation where there's more spending on the table than money, and there probably won't be as much money, much revenue resources as when the governor put a budget together.
Saturday, we had a piece comparing the last 5 months of job numbers both in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And given that Massachusetts has a 6 times larger population, the trends were still not wonderfully positive. Massachusetts has had a just continuous, robust job creation machine. It netted out 32,000 new jobs over the past 5 months. What the most incredible number is, in the nation, in the month of February, the U.S. economy only added 33,000 new jobs. Massachusetts added a third of them at 11,000.
Yeah, but the next month, I think the national economy is close to 200,000 jobs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Rhode Island, the last 5 months, not monumental decline in job numbers, but in cumulative, every month a few hundred, 1,000, 1,700, whatever the number. Reason to worry?
Yeah, there's a damn good reason to worry because we should not be losing jobs
In this economy.
And there's 1 month blips, which are blips, but now we have 4 or 5 months experience. I think the cumulative loss of jobs over that 4 or 5 month period is probably 5,000-6,000 jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's about 5,700 jobs that we've lost, while Massachusetts is gaining 32,000. If you just say, well, if Rhode Island, based on its size, did as well as Massachusetts was doing, instead of losing almost 6,000 jobs, we'd have gained close to 5,000 jobs, or 3,000 to 5,000,
Right.
just based on the arithmetic. So that's of concern. We'll see what happens next month, but also we've talked about this before. The out-year projections. This is not unknown. The people that put together the revenue estimates, and they'll be meeting again in May, and by May 10th you'll have another revenue estimate, so these figures will be updated. But their projection was that over the next 4 or 5 years, our unemployment rate would go back up from 3.9 to close to 5%. That the job growth, annual average job growth over the next 4 years would be about 0.5% a year. Those are not dramatic numbers to drive an economy, and so there's nothing that should really surprise people, with the job losses and with the projections. I think it raises a much more fundamental question, and the question is, what is, we've had, it's like the squirrel putting away, nuts to get through the winter. We've had good times. The national economy has been up. There's been growth last year. Won't happen again next year, close to 3%. We've had, 8 years of recovery right now. In the state of Rhode Island, I don't know how much we've spent, but we spent hundreds of, over $100 million on tax credits for rebuild, on different kind of grants and incentive, programs, and yet we're seeing these numbers. And I go back, and I don't want to sound too nerdy, but the first thing that you're taught when you start to do economic development is that you have to be competitiveness, and competitiveness is the productivity, the productive way you use your people and your natural resources. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is you need a state economic development strategy. And the state economic development strategy are tied to 5 principles. And I don't think we've paid, we understand these principles, but we haven't focused on them. The first principle, is to improve productivity and innovation. So every decision you make needs to answer the question, how will this expenditure, this decision, this investment improve innovation?
Let's talk about this for a second. Bloomberg came out with every 3 years, they do a state-by-state report on how well states are innovating. And in analysis of this, the 2019 numbers came out, and Rhode Island was second only to Alabama in the number of slots Rhode Island lost in its rankings. It went from 16th to 23rd, loss of 7 spots. Massachusetts was number 2 in the country. Connecticut, number 4 in the country. And the place that Rhode Island did the worst, but almost at the bottom, I think it was around 33rd or 30, yeah, was productivity. Why, you know, how is it that we're in a position like that?
Well, I think, I don't have an easy answer, and it's not a silver bullet, but I know there's certain principles of an economic strategy, and I don't think we've focused enough on them. We focus some. See, the problem with our economic development strategy is we focused on everything, and if you focus on everything, you focus on nothing. So the first thing is, it was improving productivity and innovation the guiding principle. The answer is, in some cases it was, in most cases it wasn't. If you are sitting around having arguments on developing real estate, there's nothing about productivity and innovation in developing real estate. Maybe desirable things to do in some cases, but that's not driving your policy choices.
To play devil's advocate for 1 second, take up the Commerce RI position. They say, listen, we've helped build Wexford, which is going to be a springboard to more innovation. We built this Innovate Newport, helped participate in that, and then we're building these through the state bond issue, these innovation centers around the state of Rhode Island. Listen, we didn't have any infrastructure. We didn't even have a building to put creative companies.
So let me go through this, because all the programs sound good, and they're not bad programs, but they're 5 years into the Commerce RI. And so maybe that would be the first thing that we've done, so we're dealing with right now. No, but if you look at innovation, there are 5 or 6 programs that Commerce Rhode Island runs that are geared towards innovation. They have innovation, vouchers, and I think in terms of innovation vouchers, they spent about $10 million over 3 years. That's not a scale.
Right.
They have the innovation hubs, the ones you've mentioned at Newport and Wexford. This is the 5th or 6th year into their existence, so we have the hubs, but none of them are open yet. So
right.
What? We have the governor brags about the Rhode Island computer science in the high schools. Well, we brag about that, but we haven't improved productivity or innovation because we have failing schools and education reform.
Do we move too slow? Fane Tower is a perfect example. We're going on year 4 of that proposal.
Well,
there's not a shovel anywhere close to being brought into a Benny's. Oh, wait, we don't have Benny's anymore. We're not even close to realizing that project.
Well,
can you imagine another state holding up a $300 million project?
I don't know if we move too slow, because I look at all these programs, and we have the wave makers, we have economic incentives, we have a number of things. We have 6, 7 programs. The question is not moving too slow, but in making our choices. Were we strategic in making those choices? So you asked me if we moved too slow. No, we haven't moved too slow on giving grants to build 6 hotels.
Right.
But we sure as hell have moved slow on innovation hubs. We sure as hell moved slow on the innovation campuses. All good ideas. So yes, were we too slow? Well, we were too slow in how we ordered our priorities.
So let's just look at these. Hotels, the funding went to private investors, whoever it is, Procacciani Group, Paolino. These guys know how to, whether you like them, don't think they should get the funding, whatever you want to say, they know how to build stuff.
Yeah.
So they build stuff. In the case of these state projects, a much slower maturation time frame.
Bruce Sunderland, our friend, used to say, and we could say it again, couldn't say it for a few years, if the Russians were in South Attleboro, you move pretty quick.
Yeah, right.
Okay. If a guy, if it's the last 10 seconds of a game and they're on your 2-yard line, you're going to be stout up the middle. There's excuses. It's a leadership, it's a policy development. It's not to say that we shouldn't have made some of these real estate deals. We should have, of course. But in terms of energy and focus and using your resources, it's very clear that the principles of economic development are innovation. So every decision, every policy choice has to ask that question. And in some cases, you don't choose that. Second issue is clusters. We know very well that you don't grow jobs unless you have clusters. You have to create synergies so companies want to come here. That's either service the major occupants of the cluster or compete, in that cluster. We have to relentlessly move to improve education. We've known all this, and those are the fundamentals of an innovation agenda: making choice, building clusters, improving your schools. Okay, uh, and that we've been slow off the mark. We've talked about it in our innovation toolbox. We have some, very good programs. But I look at the Wavemakers program, for example, which I think is a great program. It's helped 670 people.
Yeah.
I mentioned the innovation vouchers. We've awarded 70 innovation vouchers. Those are good things, but you're not going to change an economy. You're not going to change a culture when you don't fund these things at scale. And you're not going to change an economy. You're not going to change economic development culture unless you ask the question, in terms of my strategy, what comes first, second, or third? And I think, and no absolutes in this business. So when I say that, that sounds awful simple, and we can nicely, create nice little boxes and put things in. You can't create boxes because you have to do some of the real estate things as well. My point is that you asked if we moved too slow. I say we made the wrong choices because we didn't have the right paradigm, and the right paradigm would have been, is every decision I'm making going to improve the productive use of our resources in the state, whether it's people or materials or whatever, and is every decision I make going to be geared towards building innovate clusters where people can innovate in, and coming back to me 6 years later and say, we're going to have innovation campuses, we're going to have innovation hubs, we're going to have Wexford, which is not what Wexford was when we first started out, is fine. And maybe 10 years, maybe 4 years later when these things come up, they'll be great and the investments will be well worth it. But the issue is people pass us by. The numbers that you mentioned that came out from Bloomberg on their innovation index, you have to scratch your head and say,
Well, do we sometimes think, oh, we had a little success here, that's all we need to do? The reality is the world spins quickly right now. 4 years ago is a lifetime in business. Go back and look at the Forbes top 25 companies and go back 4 years ago and compare them to now. They're not the same list, right? Innovation drives these things. Barely folks had heard of Airbnb or Uber 4 years ago.
So I'll ask you a simple question, and I don't know where the end of the line is on this thing, but we all recognize, anybody that thinks about this, that in the next 5 or 7 years, the nature of work is going to be different.
Dramatically different.
And we're still going to have 1 million people here. Unfortunately, we won't have 1.5 million people, which we need to really grow the economy, but we'll still have 1 million people here. Okay, and this is the answer to your question, are we moving too slow? No, when we move on AI and focus our programs on AI 3 or 4 years from now, Connecticut, Massachusetts, California, are going to pass us by, and resources are finite. So what we as a small state ought to be doing right now is not spending as much staff time on real estate, but spending more time and saying, okay, the nature of work is going to change. I, as an elected official, have a responsibility to make sure the people that vote for me, or even the people that don't vote for me, that live in my state, have economic opportunity in the future.
Listen, God bless the people of Stop and Shop. Glad that labor issue is resolved on Easter Sunday. There were 31,000 of them on strike. It's a 3-year agreement. Do we really think 3 years from now, automation, robotics isn't going to transform those supermarkets? They'll be lucky to have 25,000 of those jobs remaining.
One of the issues that I think existed between management and labor was the number of checkout places that they were going to automate. Mm-hmm. You walk into a Stop and Shop today, which I don't normally do, but I was told by my kids that there's a robot running around sweeping things up. Well, if the robot's sweeping things up, then he's going to get real smart one day and be able to go into the back room and find out where the peas are and bring the peas and put the peas on the shelf. So, but that's not just Stop and Shop. It's in offices. It's in other kind of retail. It's on factory floors. AI is going to, artificial intelligence is going to change the nature of work. Now, Rhode Island is a small little entity of 1 million people, 45 or 47 miles long. It's not going to be the tail wagging the dog. But if you want to talk about economic competitiveness is the
How many students at MIT today are thinking about developing, brainchilding, AI and robotic solutions this very moment? Hundreds, if not thousands, of MIT students have their sole thought process of what they're going to do after they graduate in that sphere. And
it's a
is Rhode Island bringing those same smart kids from Brown, you or I, together to be able to compete?
Well, they could. You talk about the innovation.
They could, but are they?
Well, maybe so, maybe not. But it's what they do in the future. It's not what we've done in the past. The innovation campuses that are being talked about, there are partnerships being developed with Arizona State. There are partnerships, I understand, being developed with IBM. So yeah, the potential is there to do it. It's a question of leadership, and I, without second guessing, 'cause it's easy to second guess. Why weren't the innovation campuses the first thing on the agenda? Why weren't the innovation hubs the first thing on the agenda? Why wasn't our policy driven by the question? It's the fourth time we'll raise this question. In making choices and spending, finite money, what will this do to make us more innovative? What will this do to make us more productive?
So let me ask you a question. Do we throw up our hands and say, God, we can't get out of our own way? Or what is it that can be done right now, right here, by Nick Mattiello, Dominic Ruggiero, Gina Raimondo, Stephen Pryor, to expedite and transform the Rhode Island economy?
Well,
or expedite the transformation of the Rhode Island economy?
It's steps you want to take. Well, there are things the legislature could do, and I think the legislature dropped the ball, is there has not been, to my knowledge, and I may not know this, an independent assessment of what we've done, what we've gotten for it. So before you can do a whole lot, you better figure out where you've been and what you've gotten from being there. And so the first thing the legislature can do, and this can be done pretty quickly, is to figure out what the hell,
You're talking about a formal audit of where's the money gone, what their impact, kind of cost-benefit analysis.
Yes, yeah, because I have to know what we've been getting. The second thing, and I think there's some signs of this, is to find out what they can do to expedite the innovation campuses, the innovation hubs. The third thing is to expedite what can be done, in education development, both at the higher and at the elementary and secondary level. Those are the things you can do. Instead of talking about a promise program where you spend $5 or $6 million more in sending kids to schools where you're not quite sure that what that is going to generate in terms of the economic future of the state. What if you spent $5 or $6 million more on something that was geared towards, improving productivity and innovation?
We're hearing promise at Rhode Island College is functionally dead in this legislative session. But let me tell you the one benefit of the Promise program, and you can say, well, it's a failure in some degree. Such a small number of the students who entered the program are going to complete it within 2 years, tuition free. The one thing that I do think it really memorialized, like the RICAS did in comparison to the Massachusetts standardized testing, the MCAS, is it really demonstrably proved that the kids coming out of Rhode Island high schools are not prepared to take college level classes, even at a community college level. They cannot handle the rigor, they can't handle 30 credits, and they can't stay in the program even when it is free.
We didn't need the Promise program to tell us that. We knew that. I mean,
well, we sure know it now.
Well, we know.
When there's a boom, there's an exclamation point.
Well, that's the leadership question. You asked me what the legislature can be doing and what some of the elected officials can be doing to take the knowledge they did have and say, hey, I'm not going to spend this because we know, and in the debate about initiating the.
But I think universally everybody felt, I think yourself, about taking the learnings from Tennessee and say, let's try it here in Rhode Island. I think the legislature was deferential.
It's a political decision. It wasn't a policy decision. It was a political decision, and certainly politics is part of it. But that's not the biggest part of the equation. The equation is to do what we've talked before and change the way we make decisions. The other issue that's really important is that if you can do economic development successfully, it ought not be government making the policy decisions and using incentives. It ought to be coming from business. And so it's easy for you and I to sit here. We've been sitting here for the last 10 minutes talking about what government is doing, what government's not doing. Where the hell's the private sector?
Yeah.
Because in places where economic development is successful, it's not driven by the government. The government's a very important player. The government's a very important partner. But it is driven by business community. And, I can make the case that the way we've set up Commerce Rhode Island can be enhanced if we gave business community more control. Having said that, that's theoretical because I don't know who the hell we'd give it to if we were going to do that.
Yeah. It seems like in most of the significant business leaders within the state of Rhode Island, and let me start with the top companies in the state, don't want to get into that minutia. The Larry Merlots and Hasbro and Textron and General Dynamics, yes, there are things they want to partner with the state, but they don't want to be managing Rhode Island's economic development priorities. They've got bigger, and they're under the pressure. I mean, both Hasbro and CVS are under tremendous pressure to perform, especially after the last 12 months of their economic performances, especially related to the stock performance.
But it's not managing. I'll give you an example, and because this used to be the case here, it hadn't been the case for a while. Look at the people that are willing to serve on State Board of Education. Look at the people who are serving on Commerce Rhode Island, and look at who they used to be. And so when you tell me that a business leader, CEO, hasn't got time to get in the weeds, I wouldn't disagree with you for a second. You're absolutely right, nor should they be asked to get in the weeds. But I would think that serving on a board, even though it takes time and it takes away from other activities, is part of a corporate responsibility. So, and this has been well written about for a long time, corporations have social and economic and political responsibility. And a lot of our corporations exercise it in various ways. Another way to exercise it is to be more visible and take greater leadership roles on decision-making boards so they're not driven by bureaucrats.
I'll push back just a little.
Push back as far as you want.
At no time ever in my lifetime was the Economic Development Corporation Board more stacked with top-level CEOs than at the time in which they approved, we can go through the names, don't need to, approved 38 studios. That was a who's who of business leaders and labor leaders in the state of Rhode Island.
And let's talk about that, because one of the things that came from that crisis, not only that crisis, but the way our economy was performing, was the reorganization and creating Commerce Rhode Island. Commerce Rhode Island was the first time that I can remember that we adequately staffed and adequately financed our economic development activities. We had the Economic Development Corporation, which never has sufficient resources to be a first-class economic development office, nor did we have the scope and the size. So we put these people on boards with very little support. To go back to your initial point, that they should not be getting into the weeds. They haven't got time. Well, they were on the board as board persons.
And didn't have the staffing level to be able to support them.
We have Commerce Rhode Island that would support them. There's a different staff. I think it's a broader staff, it's a better finance staff. No one's ever argued that Commerce Rhode Island doesn't have the resources, but then how do you create that partnership, and how do you make sure that government has more responsibility? Because otherwise it just becomes one more big government program where you're using tax incentives that has all kinds of smells of corporate welfare as you use those tax incentives, and the government's driving the policy. This doesn't work. Economic development doesn't work unless business is also in the wheelhouse directly.
In our last couple of minutes, let's just run back up to the State House for 1 second. If you're Governor Raimondo, you're Nick Mattiello, you're Dominic Ruggiero, you've got this budget problem. It looks like, we don't know, we'll wait to see the April numbers and the May forecasting, but right now it looks like it could be a more significant hole than anticipated. What do you do to try and fill it in the short term, but break this cycle of miscalculation?
Well, short term is what you focus on because you got 3 or 4 weeks to get out of there. Is to focus on the spending side. They've done enough on the she's done enough on the revenue side at this point, and to 200 more FTEs, 4% growth, new programs. You really have to start by funding what you think is important and jettisoning everything else.
Do you have to go back old school, a real hiring freeze? And I mean a real hiring
No,
freeze.
those things
Do you have to
don't-
go furloughs? Do you have to go early retirements? Those sort
No,
of
never early retirement, but never. Because
catches up with you in the long term.
well, you see, it may work in the private sector where somebody takes early retirement, the position disappears.
Right.
In government, there are too many positions that cannot disappear.
Right.
So you give a firefighter, you give a social worker, or you give a social worker early retirement, and a kid gets hurt at DCYF.
Right.
That doesn't work. So that's off the board. Furloughs. It can't be balanced just on the back, of labor, and those things are very tumultuous. There may be a point we get to, but I think the first step is to cut back on new initiatives, cut back on new payroll, then look at what other programs you could not necessarily cut back on, but phase in, and establish a number and try to get the spending side back down to that number. That's the first thing you do. And that pays dividends in the long term, because if you lower your base and then you project spending from that base into the out years, you're in a little bit better shape. That's the first part of it. That's all you can do. There's not a whole lot more you can do but to manage the spending. Longer term, much longer answer. You really have to set realistic spending targets and live with those targets. That's the way we don't focus on spending very much anymore.
Gary Sasse, the Money Man, thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure,
As
sir.
always. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to a jam-packed day on GoLocal Live. Tom Frank, Pulitzer Prize finalist, journalist, was on at 2:30 talking about the Mueller report, and then we went into Ernie Almonte and Asher Schofield. Ernie Almonte talking about World Trade Day, and Asher talking about reinventing retailing, how to be local within a local community and fight off the potential challenges of folks like Amazon and big boxes, and Gary Sasse, the Money Man. We'll be back tomorrow. Kate Nagel will have the afternoon swing. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Stay tuned for more updates on GoLocal Live on a number of issues that are developing.